War has a way of erasing the line between heroism and sheer survival. You think you're prepared, you've drilled every scenario, memorized every contingency. Then the world tilts and the textbook burns away in the first burst of gunfire. I've seen soldiers vanish in the dust of Afghanistan. Good men, strong men, men who'd sworn they'd never get caught, only to be dragged off screaming. Out there, luck isn't just a factor, it's the difference between a body bag and a call home. That's why this story caught my attention. Not just because Alexis Morgan survived, but because she turned captivity into a battlefield and fear into a weapon. It's the kind of story that makes even veterans like me stop and ask, how the hell did she pull it off? And that's where this begins, inside a cell that wasn't a prison at all, but the opening move of her counterattack. Fog clung to the ridges of the Blue Ridge Mountains, swallowing the narrow trail like a living thing. Most kids in North Carolina spent their weekends chasing baseballs or hanging out at the diner. Alexis Morgan spent hers learning how to disappear. Her grandfather, James Ghost Walker Morgan, wasn't a gentle man. A former Green Beret with 3 tours in Vietnam, he taught lessons that didn't come out of any schoolbook. Survival's not about a good weapon, he'd growl, voice gravelly as the mountain rode. It's about a cold mind. You lose your head, you lose your life. While other kids played, Alexis was deep in the woods, tracking deer prints through the mud, finding water where there was none, twisting branches into traps. He made her think like the enemy, not the hunted, the hunter. When someone's chasing you, don't run like prey, he said once, setting his weathered hand on her shoulder. Run like the wolf hunting the man who hunts you. Her grandmother, Sarah Silent Wind Morgan, taught different lessons, lessons as old as the Cherokee blood running in her veins. Sarah moved through the forest as if it breathed with her. Every step, Sarah whispered, must vanish into the earth's breath. If you belong to the land will hide you. Alexis learned to walk without sound, to slip through pine needles and fallen leaves without breaking a twig. By the time she was 12, she could vanish into the trees so completely that even Ghost Walker himself had trouble finding her. But these lessons came with a cost. Where other children felt safe, she learned to feel exposed. Where they laughed freely, she watched and calculated. Some nights, lying awake in the cabin loft, Alexis wondered if she'd ever have a normal childhood, or if Ghost Walker had already shaped her into something else entirely. Something sharper, something colder. Years later, when the world turned hostile and the rules of survival weren't written on paper, those mountains, those harsh lessons would come back to her, not as memories but as instincts, as weapons. And the girl who once wondered if she was losing her childhood would discover she was gaining something far more dangerous. But training in the forest was one thing. The first time Alexis faced a real enemy was another story entirely. The rain in Fort Benning didn't fall, it hammered. By the 3rd week of Ranger training, mud swallowed boots and exhaustion clung like a second skin. Dozens of recruits were breaking, knees blown out, lungs burned raw. But Alexis Morgan stayed sharp. At 18, she wasn't just strong, she was unshakable. When others pushed forward on muscle alone, she moved on instinct, reading wind shifts, spotting a snapped twig before anyone else even heard it. "You've got eyes like a hawk," her squad leader muttered once, watching her track a hidden observer during a night raid exercise. "No, sir," Alexis answered flatly, rain dripping from her cap. "I just know where people try to hide." She was being shaped into something rare, not just a ranger but a combat medic, one who could drag a bleeding man out of fire or put a bullet through whoever caused it. The Army didn't hand out that dual role often. It took brains, reflexes, and a heart steady enough to heal or kill without hesitation. During a live-fire simulation, tracer rounds hissed over the trench line. One recruit froze. Another panicked and ran the wrong way. Alexis caught both in a glance, mapped the kill zone, and barked orders with a voice colder than the Georgia rain. "Stay low. Follow my lead. If I stop moving, start shooting." She carried one man out on her shoulders, then picked up her rifle and finished the drill without missing a step. Word spread. They started calling her Reaper, not because she was heartless, far from it, but because she appeared without warning and ended threats before anyone else knew they were there. Some nights, lying awake on her bunk, Alexis wondered what the name really meant. Did they see her as a protector, or as a weapon the Army was sharpening for some future war? She never asked, and she never slowed down. Every 20-mile ruck march, every night navigation drill, every choking gas chamber test, she pushed past the edge, past where fear lived, where there was only action. Pain is just information, she told herself once, knees bleeding after a forced march. Fear is just a distraction. By the end of training, the instructors stopped watching if she'd make it. They started watching what she'd become. But combat training is one thing. The first time Alexis faced real gunfire, she learned what no school could teach. The Hindu Kush mountains rose like jagged knives against a pale Afghan dawn. Thin air, bitter cold, no room for mistakes. Alexis Morgan's Ranger unit moved in silence, boots sinking into loose shale, rifles sweeping every ridgeline. What was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance, 3 hours in, 3 hours out, felt almost too quiet. Too clean, Alexis thought, glancing at the cliffs above. No shepherds, no kids, even the wind feels wrong. Then the world exploded. A blast tore through the lead element, ripping men from their feet, echo bouncing through the valley like thunder trapped in stone. Alexis hit the ground hard, ears ringing, vision swimming. When she looked up, the path behind her was gone, smoke, fire, and a wall of shattered rock. Radio static screamed in her earpiece. No voices, no commands. And out of the haze, figures appeared, armed, fast, disciplined, not the usual bandits. These were Hassan's men, Rashid Hassan, the warlord who had made villages vanish overnight, a ghost with a taste for theater. They swarmed before Alexis could reach her squad. 2 went down under her rifle, but a third slammed her against the rock, knocking her weapon loose. She drew her sidearm. Another flashbang blinded her, and then rough hands pinned her to the ground. This isn't happening. Rangers don't get taken alive. When she woke, her wrists were bound. A canvas hood ripped off her head, revealing a stone room lit by one naked bulb. Hassan stood there in a pressed black tunic, calm as a man greeting dinner guests. "The famous Reaper," he said in perfect English, smiling as if they were old friends. "Even America's daughters bleed." Alexis tasted iron in her mouth, blood from a split lip, but her eyes stayed steady. No fear, no plea, just calculation. Every corner of the room, every guard's weapon. The way the bolt on the door sat slightly loose, Hassan leaned closer. "We will show the world your tears, Ranger, proof that the empire of your flag is weak." She almost laughed. "You really think I'm your message?" She whispered, voice hoarse but sharp as glass. "You have no idea what you've just done." He mistook it for bravado. But inside, Alexis wasn't angry. She was cold, silent. The way her grandfather taught her in North Carolina, when the wolf hunts you, hunt the wolf first. They moved her at night deeper into the mountains, cameras ready to stage their little spectacle. She stumbled, pretending weakness, memorizing every path, every bend of the trail. Each insult, each shove from a guard was just another piece of information. 3 guards on rotation. One favors his left leg, old injury. The ridge above the camp, loose gravel. Good for a slide if I need cover. Wait until moonrise, wind at my back will cover the sound. Rashid Hassan thought he'd captured a prisoner. What he'd really done was lock himself in a cage with a predator. The night Alexis chose to escape would turn Hassan's perfect trap inside out and mark the beginning of a reckoning no one saw coming. The cell stank of diesel and damp stone. The air was thin, each breath scraping her throat raw, but Alexis Morgan forced her chest to rise and fall like someone barely clinging to life. 3 days. That's how long she'd been here. 3 days of pretending to be broken. She spent every waking second memorizing. The guard with the scar down his jaw limped on his right side, shift change at midnight. The boy with nervous eyes counted his prayer beads on the hour. The radio cracked every 3 hours when they rotated patrols. Alexis marked it all, carving an invisible map inside her head. Stay weak. Let them underestimate you. Let them believe the Reaper has no teeth. On the 4th night, the wind howled through the valley like a wounded animal, perfect cover. A young guard lingered too long outside her door, humming to keep himself awake. The moment his shadow shifted too close, silence. A whisper of movement, a muffled gasp, then nothing. The guard never made a sound again. Alexis slipped into the darkness wearing his rifle and uniform, but she didn't run. Running would trigger alarms. Running would tell them she was still alive. No, she became a ghost inside their own camp. By dawn, a second guard disappeared. That night, a third. Not killed in open combat, just gone. Weapons missing, radios smashed. Footprints erased by someone who knew how to move like smoke. Panic spread faster than the mountain wind. Hardened fighters jumped at shadows. Hassan's lieutenants barked orders, but their voices trembled. "It's her," one man whispered. "The American. She walks like death." Alexis watched from the rafters of a supply shed as they argued, her heartbeat steady, cold. She had no time for fear, only purpose. Every night she struck with precision, cutting wires, jamming signals, stealing maps. She learned Hassan's entire network from scraps of conversation and documents snatched from careless hands. A major assault against U.S. forces was only days away. Escape isn't victory, she told herself. Burn this operation to the ground. On the sixth night, Hassan gathered his inner circle in the main hall. They spoke in hushed tones, unaware that Alexis lay hidden above them, pressed flat against a rotting beam, listening to every word. "The Americans are blind," Hassan assured his men. "Our strike will cripple them." "Not if I cripple you first," Alexis thought. By the seventh day, the camp felt cursed. Men refused to leave their bunks at night. Every snapping branch was an enemy. Every shadow looked like her. Alexis used their fear like a weapon. She left boot prints pointing the wrong way, whispered in the dark to lure guards off post, made them fire into empty ravines until their own ammunition ran low. The Reaper had returned, not as a soldier in formation but as a predator in the dark. What Alexis discovered next, the heart of Hassan's plan, would force her to risk everything. Not just to survive, but to strike first, before an entire battalion walked into hell. Night bled into the mountains like ink, swallowing every trace of moonlight. The air was razor-thin, biting cold, but Alexis Morgan barely felt it. Her heartbeat was steady, deliberate, timed to the rhythm of the steps she'd been counting for days. 8 nights in captivity, 8 nights of stalking her prey. Now the Reaper would finish what she started. She moved through the camp like a shadow stitched to the wind. In one hand, a bundle of homemade charges, pulled from scavenged blasting caps, stripped wires, and the guard shack's own fuel reserves. In the other, a combat knife taken from the first man foolish enough to underestimate her. The camp's generator throbbed in the distance, a constant heartbeat for the terrorist stronghold. She crouched near the fuel line, slid the charge into place, and whispered to herself. One spark, one artery cut. Every placement was precise. Under the ammo crates in the armory, inside the radio shack where Hassan's men called for orders, along the fuel depot feeding the trucks that would deliver death to American soldiers. As she worked, her mind replayed a voice from Ranger School, her old instructor, barking over a freezing night march. "Pain is weakness leaving the body, Morgan. Fear is a liar. Don't ever negotiate with it." She smiled grimly. Fear wasn't negotiating tonight. Fear was running for its life. The first blast hit at 0200. A rolling thunderclap lit the sky as the armory vanished in a bloom of fire. Men screamed, weapons clattered, alarms wailed into the thin Afghan night. By the time they scrambled to man their posts, the second explosion tore through the communications center. Sparks rained down like fiery snow. Radios went dead. Hassan's voice, usually cold and commanding, broke with panic as he shouted in the courtyard. "Find her! She's here! Kill her!" But Alexis was already gone, a phantom slipping between burning tents, watching chaos spread like gasoline on water. Fighters shot at shadows. Some fled into the darkness. The mighty warlord's fortress had turned into a cage, and she was rattling every bar. Hassan bolted for his personal vehicle, clutching a briefcase, the plans. He didn't make it 50 yards. A single shot shattered his headlight. He froze. Out of the smoke, Alexis stepped forward, rifle leveled, eyes flat and unblinking. "You wanted a trophy, Hassan," she said, voice steady as steel. "Here I am." He tried to draw his pistol. She didn't give him the chance. 2 shots center mass. The warlord crumpled into the dust, the briefcase sliding from his fingers. Inside, documents, target grids, dates, the entire blueprint of an attack meant to slaughter hundreds of Americans. As the firestorm roared around her, Alexis crouched and whispered over his body, not out of mercy but resolve. "You don't get to write the ending. I do." By the time the rescue chopper carved through the dawn sky, the camp was a smoking ruin. No resistance. No survivors. The Rangers on board stared down in disbelief. They hadn't come to save a prisoner. They'd come to pick up a one-woman wrecking crew. When Alexis stepped into the rotor wash, soot streaked her face, but her eyes were clear, cold, unshaken. In her hands was the briefcase, proof. Victory. A warning to every man who thought a soldier could be broken just because she was captured. They'd expected a victim. They got the Reaper. But even victory has a price, and the mission had changed Alexis in ways no one at home could see. What waited for her after the battlefield might prove harder to survive than war itself. The desert night in Afghanistan had a way of swallowing sound. You could scream into it, and it wouldn't echo back, just vanish into endless black. I've been there before. I know what it's like to feel the ground tremble under distant mortar fire, to taste the metallic dust that coats your teeth when you're too scared to breathe through your mouth. And I know what happens when theory collides head-on with reality. They teach you in Ranger school, always have an exit plan, always keep your weapon clean, always expect the ambush. But no amount of drills prepares you for when the plan falls apart, when you're cut off, bleeding, and the enemy owns the night. I remember Iraq, Fallujah, 2006. A buddy of mine, Staff Sergeant Ryan Keller, got separated from our patrol when an IED blew half a Humvee into the air. 2 men dead instantly. Ryan crawled through alleyways with nothing but a combat knife and a half-empty water bottle. For 48 hours he was hunted. Every sound could have been his last. Every shadow might have been the trigger puller. He made it back by sheer will, dehydrated to the point of hallucination. That was a miracle. But Alexis Morgan, she didn't just survive, she hunted back. When the first intel report came in that a captured Ranger had single-handedly dismantled a terror cell, half the officers I knew rolled their eyes. Impossible, they said. Prisoners don't fight back, they break. I didn't. I'd seen what the right mindset could do. What Alexis did wasn't about brute strength. It was adaptation. She mapped her prison from memory, memorized guard rotations, stole weapons without firing a shot, and turned a cell block into a kill zone. That's asymmetric warfare in its purest form, when weakness becomes camouflage, and every mistake your enemy makes becomes a bullet with their name on it. Picture it. A guard lights a cigarette, thinking no one's watching. He doesn't finish it. A few minutes later, his rifle is gone too. A patrol circles the compound, but the radio chatter dies mid-sentence. Wires cut, power gone. By nightfall, panic spreads faster than gunfire. Men shoot at ghosts. Hassan shouts into dead comms, his voice cracking under pressure. She's one soldier, find her now. But he never understood. Alexis wasn't fighting on their terms anymore. She chose the time, the ground, the rules, and that's how the few can defeat the many. I've buried friends who never got the chance to fight back. Some were captured and executed before reinforcements arrived. Some vanished without a trace. That's the cruel math of combat. The enemy only has to be lucky once. You have to be lucky every single time. So when I read how Alexis didn't just survive but demolished an entire network, I felt two things at once: admiration and disbelief. Not because it was impossible, but because it was rare. Rare to see someone stay that calm under pressure, to use fear as a weapon instead of being consumed by it. It reminded me of something an old Green Beret once told me in Mosul. War doesn't test your training. It tests who you are when the training fails. Alexis proved that point better than anyone I've ever heard of. But battlefield legends come at a cost, and the war doesn't always end when the mission does. What haunted Alexis afterward would be far deadlier than any ambush in the mountains. When the smoke cleared, there was no debate left. Alexis Morgan didn't just escape. She rewrote the rulebook on what a single soldier could do behind enemy lines. But here's the question I can't shake. Was this pure skill or something darker? No one walks away from a mission like that unchanged. If you were in her boots, cut off, hunted, outnumbered 100 to 1, would you fight like that? Could you? I've told you what happened. Now I want to hear what you think. Was Alexis a miracle of training, or just the right kind of ruthless at the right time?